Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is noon, and we'll kick off our first ever Lunch and Learn series with the Wyoming Airports Coalition. I'll work through a few housekeeping matters as we have folks joining on. My name's Kyle Butterfield. I'm the president of the Airports Coalition, and really excited about this opportunity to start hopefully a new tradition for our coalition. We're looking to have these virtual Lunch and Learn series every month, especially as now we're leading into our conference. And that would be the next announcement I'd like to make and remind everybody that our annual fall conference is scheduled. It will be in Saratoga, Wyoming this year. And we encourage folks to begin booking their rooms now. Saratoga is a resort community, beautiful community. And therefore, if you don't get your rooms now, there may be a challenge as you get closer to the actual dates of the conference, which will be September 18th through the 20th. And we have a very exciting lineup. The theme for the conference will be fundamentals. And we very much look forward to Saratoga hosting and having our coalition members join. By way of some housekeeping, Mr. Brubaker, who I'll introduce here in a moment, will be running through the majority of our Lunch and Learn today. And I will be working on the question and answer portion. You'll notice on your screen, you'll have opportunity to pose questions, and I'll monitor that and make sure that we answer anything that comes up. So without further ado, again, I'm very excited to kick off our first virtual Lunch and Learn. And we're very pleased to have the vice president of our organization, Devin Brubaker, who is the airport director at Southwest Wyoming Regional Airport. Devin is very accomplished. He's a member of the board for Northwest AAAE. He's currently the chair of our coalition's legislative committee and is very engaged when it comes to not just state legislation, but also when we look at congressional matters at Washington, D.C. We're very pleased to have him today. And with that, I will yield the floor to Mr. Brubaker and give him the opportunity to update us on the recently passed reauthorization bill. Mr. Brubaker.
Thanks, Kyle. I don't know the last time I was called Mr. Brubaker. I feel a little official. Appreciate that. First of all, just want to thank you for getting us kicked off with this webinar series. I'm excited for what it brings to our membership and to Wyoming airports. And I'm ecstatic that here in May of 2024, we're able to do this as our first topic, FAA reauthorization. If you would have asked me about a month ago if that was going to happen, I think I specifically told Kyle that that is not going to happen. We need to save that webinar for later this year. And then Congress came around and surprised us. So excited to be able to kick off our webinar series with this topic. Excited to see so many people on the call. A little intimidating, quite honestly, having 40 of you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get us started here. See if I can do this correctly. So while that starts populating, I want to also encourage folks to go ahead and, as Kyle mentioned, use the Q&A button. We want to make sure that if you have questions, that we try to address them throughout the presentation and again at the end. So I have a couple disclaimers as we get started. The FAA reauthorization bill is an authorizing legislation and does not include any appropriations. So today, when we talk about dollars and cents, please know that there is still work to be done. Just because the Congress has authorized it does not mean that it's been appropriated. It just means that the appropriators in Congress have the authority to appropriate up to that dollar amount. My next bullet point is I am not a lawyer. The content of this presentation is a summary of the bill. Attendees should identify sections of interest and consult with their own counsel or their own experts before acting. I've been heavily engaged in this process for over 18 months and have what I believe to be a very strong understanding of what's in the bill. But I hope that you won't come back to me 6 months from now and say, Devin said, and the FAA says otherwise. That leads me to my next point. The FAA is bound to interpret certain sections of the bill differently than I do, or differently than the airport industry does. The only thing that the presenter can guarantee is that they will find a way to interpret many provisions in a manner that conflicts with congressional intent. We saw that in the last two reauthorization bills, that they don't always follow what Congress wants them to do. Several provisions from the 2018 reauthorization bill are yet to be implemented in full by the FAA. And what that means is official guidance from the FAA on all the provisions that are within this massive piece of legislation will likely take years. I will apologize in advance. I didn't put a bunch of fancy artwork or pictures in this presentation. It's my hope that I and our content are entertainment enough as we move through it. Really, the focus is on speaking to the bill. So what is FAA reauthorization? For those of you that are new to this industry or new to the idea of what FAA reauthorization, the Reauthorization Act of 2024 is a United States federal law enacted during the 118th United States Congress, which authorizes our friends at the FAA and other programs, including NTSB, until the end of fiscal year 2028. It provides authority to impose and collect aviation taxes and fees that are critical to funding the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. I already mentioned it provides the authority for the NTSB to operate. This generally will occur every 5 years. However, as we all know, Congress generally does not shy away from missing deadlines. So for instance, we have a Reauthorization Act of 2024. The one prior to this was 2018. The one prior to that was 2012. And the one prior to that was all the way back in 2003. You might ask what happens in between when authorization expires. Congress does this beautiful thing called continuing resolutions. I believe we had 3 or 4 of them since the Reauthorization Act of 2018 expired. The biggest record was back between 2007 and 2012. After Vision 100 expired, there was 23 continuing resolutions that lasted over the course of 5 different years. So we are blessed that Congress was able to execute a reauthorization bill on just a couple short-term continuing resolutions. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into basically the different components of what's in the bill. I've tried to break these out into the different subject areas. And you will note that everything that is in this presentation is focused on impacts to airports. The bill is well over 1,000 pages long and has impacts on airlines, has impacts on flight schools, has impacts on advanced air mobility, general aviation, quite a few things that aren't going to be included in this presentation. If we covered every section of this presentation, we would be here till tomorrow very easily. So please note that if you want to learn more, it is very engaging reading. I'd encourage you to go read all 1,000+ pages of the bill to learn more about other impacts to other parts of the aviation industry. We'll start off right away with the funding and taxing authorizations. So Section 101, the very first section of the bill, was welcome news for airports. It included the authorization for the Airport Improvement Program. It authorizes AIP at the current rate, $3.35 billion in federal fiscal year 2024. And then in federal fiscal year through 25 through 28, it increases that authorization to $4 billion. You'll notice that the title of the section is highlighted or is green in color. As we go through this bill, anything that is green in color are items that your Legislative Affairs Committee for the Wyoming Airports Coalition worked on, either in support of or in opposition to. And so I'll put a heavy emphasis on those items because those are the items that we highlighted as important to Wyoming airports. Section 1301 and Section 1302 basically extend the authority to collect taxes for the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, the fuel taxes and the ticket taxes, and then the expenditure authority to spend those revenues through the end of fiscal year 2028. I apologize in advance for the very small print on this slide. This is the long list of new additions to the Airport Improvement Program. in terms of eligibility. So if any of you have ever spent any time in CFR 49, reading the actual statute, the regulation, you'll know that the way that AIP eligibility is determined in large part is through the definitions section of that statute. So as we look at all the different new eligibility opportunities for airports, we'll run down these. A secondary runway at a non-hub airport that is equivalent in size and type to a primary runway of the same airport is now eligible. So if you have two runways that are the same size, one of which is a secondary, you can now make that secondary runway eligible. Another one that is of interest, this was a surprise to us, fuel infrastructure for snow removal equipment. So historically, snow removal equipment is eligible, but not the fuel infrastructure to support it. So this could be a, if you will, a backdoor way of funding at least part of the cost of a fuel farm using federal dollars. Next one is medium intensity approach lighting systems with a runway alignment indicator lights are eligible. The next one is highlighted in green because this is an area that we fought for. Historically, there's been a VALE program, a voluntary airport low emissions program, that was only able to be used at airports that were in non-attainment or maintenance areas in terms of air quality. We were successful in advocating to get that eligibility expanded to all commercial service airports. And that allows those airports to buy or make improvements that reduce the emissions of the airport. That could be buying electric vehicles, that could be doing HVAC upgrades to a terminal, it could be doing gate electrification on your passenger boarding bridge, things like that. The next two have to do with renewable energy or renewable efficiency or energy efficiency. So it clarifies that renewable energy generation and storage infrastructure, including substation upgrades to support such infrastructure, are eligible. For any airport out there that's looking to put renewable energy on their property, solar, wind, nuclear, any of those types of things, that becomes eligible for AIP funding as well as the supporting infrastructure to make it happen. Electrochromic glass, basically the smart glass, is now eligible. If an example of this, if you're flying out of Charlotte Douglas International Airport, their new Concourse A, if I remember correctly, the Concourse A has this glass in it where it changes color depending on the time of the day to maximize energy efficiency of the building. That's now eligible. Your advanced digital construction management systems like Procore or other types of construction management software are now eligible in certain circumstances. It already was, but it clarifies it by statute now. Clarifies that improvements or planning for improvements that would be necessary to sustain commercial service flight operations or to permit the resumption of such flight operations following a natural disaster are eligible. There was some question whether that was eligible before or not, and it's been clarified now. In the next one is contingent on Section 395 of the bill. So Section 395 of the bill requires the FAA to basically now take regulatory control over aviation cybersecurity regulation. And so what this says is that if a project is needed to comply with any new rulemaking or recommendations of the Aviation Rulemaking Committee that's created by Section 395, those are now eligible for AIP funding. Reconstruction or rehab of an existing crosswind runway, regardless of the wind coverage of the primary runway, if the reconstruction or rehab of such crosswind is on the most recently approved ALP. That's a lot of words, but basically it makes crosswind runways eligible as long as they're shown on your ALP, regardless of the wind coverage. The next item has to do with the on-airport distribution or storage of unleaded aviation gas, including pipeline storage tanks, low emissions fuel systems, and airport-owned fuel trucks. That now becomes AIP eligible. Interesting, right away, what I see there for my airport, and you may see for your airport, is that's a pathway to utilize AIP funding to purchase an airport-owned fuel truck. So if you wanted to start offering unleaded aviation gas, in advance of a full-blown transition to unleaded avgas. This is an opportunity to maybe buy that truck in advance. And then once the transition's over, you have a full-fledged avgas truck to use for future needs. The next one that's highlighted in green, Brian Olson, I don't know if he's on here, he called it the Brubaker Amendment, or the Brubaker Clause. This is an amendment to the bill that I worked diligently on to make sure that taxiways and taxi lanes that lead to hangars are eligible. In 2019, the FAA updated the Airport Improvement Program handbook unilaterally without direction from Congress and took eligibility of pavements away that lead to hangars at primary airports. So at all commercial service primary airports, if you had a taxiway or a taxi lane leading to just hangars, you couldn't use FAA funding on it. That is now reversed. So that has immediate impacts on at least 3 airports in the state that I'm aware of. That'd be Laramie, Sheridan, and Rock Springs. There's likely others, but those 3 airports have the largest impact where we now have eligibility of some substantial amounts of pavement. The next item is adds eligibility for any other activity excluding terminal development that the Secretary concludes will reasonably improve the safety of the airport. This is a very strange clause that was added to the bill. This basically gives the absolute authority to the Secretary of Transportation, likewise the FAA, to determine that any activity that is going to improve safety at an airport now becomes eligible. So that is, to me, an opportunity for us to advocate for certain eligibility going forward, that may not, on things that may not be eligible. Interesting on the next one. So many commercial service airports conduct catchment area analysis. So looking at what is our catchment area, how much of the air traffic are we losing to other markets, to other airports. That is now eligible. That study is now eligible for AIP. And then the next item is adding the ability to assess current and future electrical power demand for airport airside and landside activities. So all of these items are brand new eligibility under the Airport Improvement Program. Obviously, just because they're eligible doesn't mean you're going to get them funded. You may not have enough of your own entitlement or apportionment funding to be able to fund them, and some of these will not rise high enough on the national priority rating to be able to secure discretionary funds. But anytime we can expand the eligibility list, it's a good day for airports. As we continue into some of the other provisions with the Airport Improvement Program, Section 707 now allows the FAA to incorporate price adjustment provisions into an AIP grant agreement to account for labor and material cost inflation. Previously, this was prohibited. The FAA would not fund labor or material cost inflation. It's not clear whether the FAA will actually do this or not because the way the language is worded, it simply allows the FAA to do it. It does not mean that the FAA must do it. So we will see how the FAA handles that section going forward. Section 708 is another sign of welcome news for non-hub and non-primary airports. So general aviation airports and primary commercial service non-hub airports. The federal share increases to 95% of allowable project costs for fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 26. So that's a great clause in there, having the Fed pick up a little bit more of the project costs those 2 fiscal years. Excuse me. Section 709 allows an airport to incur utility relocation and worksite preparation costs in advance of an AIP grant agreement, and makes a couple other technical amendments that are pretty insignificant. Section 710 is significant in my eyes to probably every airport in the state of Wyoming. Currently, there is a letter of intent program that is only extended to small, medium, and large hub airports. Section 710 now requires the FAA to issue AIP letters of intent to small airports, including non-hub airports and non-primary airports. So if you have a large project that is a multi-year project, let's say a runway reconstruction, an apron expansion, you can petition the FAA to issue a letter of intent, which gives you some funding certainty as you look out into the future. So that is a great provision for what I believe to be every airport in Wyoming. Section 712, here is the big one, in my opinion, for many airports across the state. So the AIP apportionment formulas are revised, and there's many changes made in this bill. So for primary airports, non-hub and larger, the minimum entitlement or apportionment funds each year goes from 1 million to 1.3 million. On all other airports, so if you have more, so if you have 10,000 employments or more, you get at $1.3 million minimum. And when you get up to a larger number of passengers, let's say in the Casper and the Jackson range, the formulas for the per passenger amount that those airports will receive are doubled. So if it used to be $7.60, it's now $15.20 per passenger up to a certain number. But it still maintains a $22 million cap. We have no airports in Wyoming that are going to touch the $22 million cap anytime soon, but that does stay the same. The other thing that's really important to airports in states like Wyoming, this bill eliminates the cliff for small commercial service airports whose passenger employments fall below 10,000. So previously, if you drop below $10,000 or 10,000 employments, you'd go from $1 million apportionment down to $150,000. There was a small step in there that allowed it, I believe, to 650,000, but ultimately you had this big cliff that happened if you drop below 10,000. Now it is 100% based on the formula. So if you have 2,500 or more passenger employments all the way up to 10,000, you will get a varying amount of apportionment based on the exact number of passengers you employed. That has an opportunity to help some general aviation airports potentially. I see that as an opportunity that if you are a general aviation airport that has quite a bit of charter activity, 135 activity, you may be able to count some of those employments. And if you can get over your threshold of 2,500, you may be able to secure more than that $150,000. We have one airport in the state that could be impacted by this next item, the cargo airport apportionment. So previously it was 3.5% of all AIP went to a cargo airport apportionment, which is formula funding for those airports. It is now increased to 4%. And it used to be that any airport that had over 100 million pounds of total landed weight for cargo would receive cargo apportionments. This bill drops that all the way down to 25 million pounds of total landed weight. So an airport like Casper is likely to secure additional funding because of this. I don't know how much yet, but it will likely see additional funding because they will be considered a cargo airport under this formula. And then for our general aviation airports, it increased the apportionment for all GA airports from 20% to 25% of all AIP funding. So if we were to be appropriated at the full $4 billion, $1 billion of that would be guaranteed to go to GA airports every year versus just, what would that be, 80 or 800 million. So it's a big increase of additional funding that can go to GA airports. That'll increase the amount of discretionary money that's available to those airports. Unfortunately, Congress did not increase the apportionment amount from $150,000 for the non-primary airports. This increase of total AIP funding does allow for additional discretionary, but you don't get an increase in your annual amount. The Wyoming Airports Coalition Legislative Committee did work on that, and it just didn't get anywhere in Congress. We tried to get that secured, as did other states, and it just didn't happen. Section 717 revises formulas and eligibilities for AIP discretionary categories. So with all the changes that happened up top, that impacts what happens with the discretionary categories and how much money is available there. It allows for projects, an increased number of projects to be funded under existing environmental programs set aside, while both lowering the maximum amount that can be spent under the set aside to 200 million and raising the minimum amount to 150 million. So between 150 and 200 million a year will be spent starting in fiscal year 26 on environmental program set-asides. 718, discretionary fund for terminal development costs. The first bullet has to do with general aviation airports, non-primary airports. So the FAA can make up to $20 million available from discretionary fund to the sponsor of a non-primary airport to pay costs for a terminal development project if the airport is reasonably expected to change to primary status based on employment data for the third calendar year after the issuance of a discretionary grant. So if you're a GA airport today and there's a chance that you become a commercial service airport based on what's happening with your employment data, you would be eligible for up to $20 million of discretionary funding for a terminal. The second bullet point is something that we advocated for, and this is to increase the maximum amount of funding that can be given to a non-hub airport for a terminal project from $20 million to $30 million. So that is in the bill. Section 725 is, and I accidentally left an extra sentence in there. It does not apply, so please ignore the last sentence there. But it does establish a pilot program to fund capital projects that improve airport accessibility in line with the ADA. So it allows you to go apply for AIP funding for projects that work to support ADA compliance. 726 creates a new pilot program for general aviation airport runway extensions. It directs the FAA to establish the pilot program that would allow GA airports to use small airport fund for certain runway extension projects that would otherwise be ineligible under AIP. Excuse me. Section 742 permits the present and future power demands for airside and landside operations to be included in airport energy assessments. It also permits AIP funding for airside energy projects. So historically, the AIP program only looked at airside when it came to energy efficiency. This allows it now to look at both airside and landside. For airports that have rental cars, we need to understand how the electrification is going to impact the overall energy needs of the airport. Even your parking lot at a general aviation airport, you're likely to one day need to have some sort of charging station for vehicles. And so this allows you to look at that using AIP funding. I'm going to pause real quick. Kyle, do we have any questions that are queued up on the AIP program before we jump into the next section? What was that, Kyle?
Hey, Devin. We've had one question come through, and that was whether or not the recording would be made available. And
okay,
we haven't decided yet or figured out the mechanism to do that, but we'd be very happy to make this information available.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. So the next item is Section 714, the Airport Safety and Resilient Infrastructure Discretionary Program. Many of us are quite aware of the existing AIP supplemental program that has existed since the Reauthorization Act of 2018. That program is eliminated by Section 714, but creates a new Airport Safety and Resilient Infrastructure Grant Program that is authorized up to $200 million per year for basically airport resilience and runway safety projects. We don't know what that'll entirely look like yet from the FAA's perspective, but basically we're now at, if you take the total $4 billion of AIP and you add this, we're now at $4.2 billion of annual authorization for airport capital projects. Obviously, devil's in the details, and we'll see how the FAA interprets Section 714 as they implement this program going forward. But we should expect to see that program become effective in fiscal year 25, assuming it's appropriated. For airports that charge a passenger facility charge, there's some changes that were undertaken by Congress here. Section 713 changed the PFC turnback. So currently, if you are a medium or large hub airport and you collect $4.50, you have to give back to the FAA basically 75% of your entitlement money. Congress has reduced that to 60%. Why that's important is that will impact the overall amount of money available to the system. While we have a higher authorized amount at $4 billion, by these large hub airports and medium hub airports not turning back that 15% of their apportionment, that money now is not available to be used for discretionary projects or for the small airport fund. So this helps the large and medium hub airports, basically. Section 775 also increases the usage of PFC revenue for certain noise costs, as well as moving federal agencies due to terminal development or renovation of a terminal. So that it adds that eligibility. And then Section 776 is a section we advocated for that streamlines the PFC program. So it implements basically a PFC authorization program, which would allow airports to file a notice of intent to impose a PFC rather than filing an application to do so. You would still have to consult with an air carrier, and comment requirements and all of the things that come with the application process still exist, but there's less authority from the FAA to reject what's in your PFC application. So that streamlines that program. Aircraft rescue firefighting. So Section 767 creates a new program called the PFAS Replacement Program. It is authorized for a one-time infusion of $350 million to buy new foam, get rid of the old foam, and clean fire trucks. Of that $350 million, $30 million is set aside for Index A airports to replace certain firefighting vehicles that cannot generate foam using the new F3 foams that are coming out. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this, the AFFF foams that are used at commercial service airports have known carcinogens in them now. And so there's a new type of foam out there called F3 foams that airports are going to have to switch over to over time. This helps airports fund those costs. How this money is distributed to airports, the FAA will create a database of what the minimum amount of foam is required for each airport in the country, and then total that amount, and whatever each airport's ratio to the total amount nationwide is, that is the ratio of the $320 million that your airport will receive. So we'll wait for further guidance from the FAA on this, but there will be funding coming to all commercial service airports, our Part 139 airports in the country that have ARF equipment. Section 769 is another section that we worked on. This was a section that came out of nowhere. We were not expecting it. And when it was first introduced in the House and passed in the House, it required all commercial service airports to have EMTs on staff and available for air carrier operations. We advocated to get that section deleted in its entirety. We were unfortunately unable to do that, but we were able to get the requirement for non-hub airports removed. So for all the commercial service airports in the state, except for Jackson, we were successful in getting this requirement removed. Jackson is likely to be a small hub airport for next year, so they will likely have to follow the rules that the FAA will dictate as part of this. Section 762 is just a report that the FAA has to do with EPA and DoD and submit progress reports to Congress on the National Transition Plan related to F3 foams. Contract Tower Program. I am far from an expert here, so for any of you that are on the call that are contract tower people, please accept my apologies. I will breeze through this briefly here. Section 605 requires DOT IG, the Inspector General, to do an audit of workforce needs for the FAA Contract Tower Program. Section 611 will review the basis for wage determination for air traffic controllers at federal contract towers. It will also create new wage determination rates for certain positions like managers and supervisors. Section 620 instructs the FAA to basically provide a little bit more time for airports to complete an operational readiness inspection. It will require the FAA to allow air traffic controllers at contract towers to procure, install, and use certain technology and equipment. And it will require DOT to consult with the industry to determine adequate limits of liability for the contract tower program. Basically, to make sure that airports or those that engage in contract tower work don't have to carry an ungodly amount of liability insurance. Over to specific air traffic control items. Section 621 basically says that the FAA needs to create a program and publish milestones for the system design and operational approval of a remote tower system. This has been tried already. FAA basically abandoned this process. Congress is now telling the FAA, get back at it. It's working in Europe. We can find a way to make it work here. And then it prioritizes airports that do not have permanent air traffic control facilities that also provide small or rural community air service, or have been newly accepted into the contract tower program to be basically the test bed for remote towers. Section 624, Air Traffic Control Tower Replacement Process Report, requires the FAA to report to Congress which facilities are chosen for replacement, and it further directs the FAA to establish and maintain a public website that lists air traffic control facilities that have been replaced in the previous 10 years and any facility that needs to be replaced but has yet to be replaced. Section 628 would apply to Jackson, requires the FAA and other agencies to consult with the National Parks Overflights Advisory Group in the development of air tour management plans. So Jim and his team up in Jackson deal with the National Parks Overflight Advisory Group when it comes to the helicopter tours and things like that over Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. Air service, there's quite a bit of air service items. Section 422 is a government accountability office study and report on the extent and effects of the commercial aviation pilot shortage on regional and commuter carriers. So just studying the extent of it, what the effects of it are on the industry. Section 562 is an area that we advocated for. It provides authorization for $15 million in annual funding for SCASD. It was $10 million. It's increased to $15 million. It also reduces the period that an applicant can apply for the same type of project from 10 years to 5. So previously, if you applied for a marketing grant and got it, you couldn't apply for another marketing grant for 10 years. Now that period is 5. And then it also it provides expanded eligibility of projects specifically to airports where services have been substantially reduced. So historically, it's been for expansion or enhanced air service. The Small Community Air Service Development Grant Program can now be used to basically build back service that was lost. Section 502 is an area that we worked on. United Airlines was opposed to an expansion of additional slots at the Washington Reagan Airport. However, one of our senators, Senator Lummis, was in support of additional slots. We tried to convince her to change her mind. That didn't work. Fortunately, there was only 5 round-trip slots added to DCA. And where that's important is there's a perimeter rule that exists at DCA that only a certain number of flights can happen beyond a 1,250-mile perimeter. And this allows there to be 5 additional round-trip slots either inside that perimeter or outside that perimeter. That has a huge value to airports like San Antonio, San Diego, and so forth that don't have direct flights to Washington Reagan. Essential air service reforms. We worked heavily with our delegation to try to institute some reforms on the EAS program. We were successful on 2 of them. The others we were not successful in securing. But the first 2 that we were successful with was reducing the per passenger subsidy cap from $1,000 to $850 beginning October 1st, 2026, and to $650 for locations that are less than 175 miles from the nearest large or medium hub airport. And then many EAS communities today are operating under a waiver granted by the DOT. and they've been operating under that waiver for many, many years. So what this does is it limits the waiver to 2 consecutive fiscal years and no more than 5 years in a 25-year period. So it should trim down some of these airports that are operating with really high subsidies or within the perimeter of a medium or large hub airport. Section 565, this could be of note for Cody and Laramie, our 2 EAS communities. This allows you to petition the DOT if you view that the carrier that's providing your service is unwilling or unable to meet the operational requirements outlined in the terms of basic essential air service. So if you have an air carrier that's not doing their job, you have the ability to petition the DOT, and then this section lays out how the DOT should respond to that petition. Section 566 funds EAS in full, increasing from 340 million in fiscal year 25 all the way up to 350 million in fiscal year 2028. Section 567 is a GAO study on costs of the Essential Air Service program. Section 563 is a GAO study and report on the alternate Essential Air Service program. I'm going to keep going here. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to keep moving as quick as I can for you all here. Weather equipment observation, you'll see a lot of green on this page. One of our highest priorities for Wyoming airports was getting some attention to the FAA's weather equipment across the state, as well as their Certified Weather Observer program that they took over from the National Weather Service about a decade ago. So Section 316 requires the GAO to examine how to improve the procurement functionality and sustainability / resiliency of weather reporting systems like ASOS and AWOSs. Section 317, I got to fix all my typos. I apologize on these. GAO study on expansion of the FAA weather camera program. So basically, the GAO will look at the potential safety benefits and the feasibility of expanding that program where there's locations that don't have that service. Section 332 requires the FAA and National Weather Service to work in collaboration to collect the real-time service status of all ASOS and AWOS and make available on a public website information such as service status, repair action, and any outages. And then Section 419 basically says the FAA may take such actions as are necessary to provide training that is easily accessible and streamlined for airport personnel to become certified as non-federal observers. The amendment we wrote here had the word shall instead of may. The Senate Commerce Committee staff changed it to the word may. We tried to get it back changed to shall. We'll see what the FAA does here. If they take that word may and say, well, we may do it, we may not do it, we'll have to see what happens there. But this is one of our key priorities going into reauthorization that is in the bill, maybe not to the extent we wanted it, but it is there. Workforce development, Section 440 basically extends the authorization for aviation workforce development training programs through federal fiscal year 2028 and increases the authorized funding levels from $5 million to $20 million for each of the programs. There's 3 programs, one for pilots, one for mechanics, and one for basically mechanical trades that support aircraft manufacturing. So we advocated for this program because there is an interest in the state from Western Wyoming Community College to start an A&P program. Your Legislative Affairs Committee will be in front of the Joint Education Committee here in a couple weeks to speak to them about a CTE program around aviation to implement that across the state. So this program was important to us. Section 372, this is the section that largely held up reauthorization getting done on time. So this section has to do with basically creating new pathways to receive your ATP. It does not reduce the 1,500-hour rule, but it does allow for enhanced qualifications program, basically, that allows pilots to get to their ATP more efficiently with better quality training. Land use. So back in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018, there was a section there, section 6, I'm drawing a blank right this section, or this moment, section 663, I think, I could be wrong on that, but it's in the 600s that basically prohibited the Department of Transportation or the FAA from regulating directly or indirectly the acquisition, use, lease, transfer, or disposal of airport property by an airport if the land was not purchased with federal funds, except to ensure airport safety and efficiency is maintained and that fair market value is received. So back in 2018, Congress said, okay, FAA, you don't have control over the land that isn't acquired with federal funds. The airports have more control there, except for these conditions. Well, the FAA, in true fashion, implemented that program and made it likely more restrictive than what it should have been. So Congress in Section 743 has attempted to clarify what they meant by the section in the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018. We'll see what the FAA does with it. Time will tell whether or not it actually improves what happened in 2018. Planning, for those planners that are on the call, I wish I could tell you that there was a lot more in this bill that had to do with planning outside of what we just talked about with land use and what we're talking about here. But basically, Section 701 requires that airport plans developed in coordination with state and local officials consider the impact of hazardous weather events on long-term operational resilience. So when we're doing our master planning, our ALP updates, our terminal area plans, taking into account hazardous weather events on the long-term operational resilience of the airport needs to be done. Advanced air mobility, Section 951 defines what advanced air mobility, powered lift aircraft, regional air mobility, urban air mobility, and vertiport are. I apologize. I should have proofread my presentation a little bit better. Section 827 Eagle Initiative is later in the presentation. I'm not sure how it made it there. Section 953 gives basically application of you can use it a categorical exclusion for vertiport projects. Congress is telling the FAA that they need to develop rules for that, basically allowing these vertiports to become categorical exclusions. Section 958 requires FAA to update the vertiport design engineering brief, publish a performance-based vertiport design advisory circular, and begin performing the work necessary to update the heliport design advisory circular in order to provide performance-based design guidance. Noise and environmental, Section 782 repeals the requirements that airports receive emissions credits when they receive AIP grants for certain environmental projects. Section 783 basically reforms and expands the applicability of the one federal decision and the expedited environmental review process. The process will apply to all airport capacity enhancement projects, terminal development projects, general aviation projects, as well as certain aviation safety projects. Section 787 requires the FAA to take certain actions to reduce undesirable aircraft noise when implementing or revising a flight procedure, and also consult with airport sponsors, impacted neighborhoods, as arrival and departure routes are determined. Section 788, we get to all thank our Senator Lummis for Section 78 or 788. This is an amendment she sponsored in the Senate Commerce Committee that basically grants categorical exclusion to all airport projects that receive less than $6 million in federal funding, which falls in line very similarly to how highway projects are handled. It also grants categorical exclusion for rebuilding of airport infrastructure that is damaged or destroyed in a natural disaster. However, the language does allow for extraordinary circumstance exception. So if you have a project that's $4 million, but there's an extraordinary exception or circumstance exception, that allows the administrator to say, hey, we're not giving you a CADX for this. What the definition of extraordinary circumstance is yet to be determined, and the FAA will determine that in their rulemaking process. But going forward, once this is implemented, we will not have to do, you'll basically have a presumed CADX on any project with $6 million or less of federal funding. Section 827, the Eagle Initiative, it requires the FAA to continue to partner with industry and other federal government stakeholders to carry out the Eliminate Aviation Gasoline Lead Emissions Initiative, otherwise known as EAGLE Initiative, through the end of 2030. It further lays out requirements on the FAA to basically ensure that by 2030 we have a complete replacement for 100 low lead, a unleaded avgas that can be used industry-wide by 2030. Grant assurances, we have some changes to our federal grant assurances. Section 703 is important to note, revenue diversion penalty enhancement. So currently there's a penalty if you are found guilty, if you will, of illegally diverting airport revenue. That penalty is now doubled. Section 705 permits an airport to renew certain nominal rate leases with National Guard units without violating revenue diversion restrictions. That would apply in Cheyenne. That would allow them to have a nominal rate lease with the National Guard. Section 770 adds a new grant assurance for all airports. It says that we all will continue to offer 100 low lead avgas as long as we had it for sale in 2022 through 2030 or the date on which the FAA has a certified unleaded avgas alternative that can be made available for purchase by all GA aircraft operators. If you violate this, if you stop offering 100 low lead prior to that date, it's a civil penalty of up to $5,000 per day for violating that grant assurance. There's some miscellaneous studies that are included that may be of note depending how they come out. You have the GAO airport or audit of airport financial reporting system. That would be Form 127. We all know that that form was used to dole out COVID relief money and really created some heartburn in the industry. So the GAO is going to be looking at that. That's something we advocated for. Section 735 will study the on-site airport generation, electrical generation, basically. Section 750 will study the fee transparency by fixed base operators at airports. Section 755 will study the transit access to airports. 765 will study competition and airport access. 765 will study regional airport capacity. 774B study on improvements for certain non-hub airports. Basically, all non-hub airports that do not have EAS is what this study is for. Other sections of interest, you have Section 745, Electric Aircraft Infrastructure Pilot Program. Section 747, Notice of Funding Opportunity. That one is interesting. A few years ago, the FAA started issuing NOFOs for all AIP grant programs. Section 747 says you don't have to do that anymore, FAA, which to me streamlines the process. Section 748, runway safety projects, tells the FAA that they need to prioritize completing runway safety projects and eliminate phasing if at all possible. Section 749, airport diagram terminology. That requires the FAA to create standardized terminology for airport diagrams having to do with transient aircraft parking. Section 752, prohibition on certain runway length requirements. We all have heard the stories of airports being forced to reduce the length or width of their runways based on current design standards when they're doing a reconstruction. This prohibits the FAA from doing that to airports. If an airport is used by the Air Force or the Army National Guard for anything. So for instance, here in Rock Springs, they bring up the aerial refuelers, the KC-135s, to do practice work. Because the military uses this runway for practice, the FAA could not tell us to reduce its length or its width based on Section 752. Section 757 addresses the numerous disputed airport sponsorship changes that have been happening around the country. It's happened in Nashville, it's happened in Charlotte, it's happened in I believe Atlanta. So this basically tells the FAA how to handle that. Section 1106 and 1107 have to basically do with prohibiting mask mandates, and then 1107 prohibiting an air carrier from denying access to flight based on their vaccination status. So what's next? The most important thing is appropriations. As I said at the beginning, everything we talked about here, has to be appropriated, or else it doesn't really exist. Section 729, it requires the FAA to update the national priority system formulas within 1 year. Section 733 requires the FAA to issue program guidance letters within 1 year implementing the changes to the AIP program. Requires a draft AIP handbook update within 2 years for public comment, and a final AIP handbook update within 3 years. And then, want to learn more? The link here in this slide is the link to the bill, the full text. And you can also contact me or any other member of the Legislative Affairs Committee, which includes myself, Jim Elwood, Glenn Januska, Kyle Butterfield, Todd Chatfield, Brian Olson, Michelle Anderson. I think I got everybody that's on there. So feel free to reach out to any of us with questions. You can also search HR 3935. And as long as you're clicking on the HR 3935, that is for the 118th Congress, you will find the bill. And then lastly, without the dedication of our congressional delegation and their teams, we would not have been nearly as successful in this process as we were. A special thank you to Marcus Brubaker, Hold Edwards, and Kristen Walker in Senator Lummis's office, Chaz Ziegler in Senator Barrasso's office, and Nicholas Sewell in Congresswoman Hegeman's office. They were all instrumental in getting many of our priorities accounted for in the reauthorization bill. And stop my share now. And I know we're running right up against it. I want to be respectful of people's time. But if we do have questions, I am excited to be able to answer them and do my best to do that. When we do find a way to distribute this presentation, I will also fix all my grammatical errors in my presentation, and we'll convert that over to PDF and get that shared with you as well. So you have a summary of what's in the bill that applies to airports. I apologize that I only left us 3 minutes in the hour, but Kyle, do we have any questions?
No, Devin, you've done a great job. We don't have any questions in the queue, but maybe we'll leave it open for a few minutes. And while we wait for any interested people that are on the call to submit anything, I'd like to just thank Mr. Brubaker for taking the time to educate us. Our board has been working for a few months now on getting this virtual Lunch and Learn series off the ground. And it was my intention to have this first one be one that is valuable to our membership, that would bring people in and see that this opportunity would be of importance and help not just our commercial and general aviation members, but also our corporate partners. Well, that's a long way of saying that we wanted a strong one for the first one, and we actually had a different plan about a month ago for this first one, and then we saw some traction with the reauthorization bill, and Devin kindly stepped up to educate our coalition. And I use that term purposefully because if you haven't noticed, Mr. Brubaker, I would say, is one of the foremost experts, not just in our state, but in our region when it comes to congressional matters, and his ability to also work with the team in Washington. And so how lucky are we to take advantage of his knowledge, and we appreciate the time you put on this. Devin, it looks like we've had a couple questions come in. This is from Riley Wilson. It says, Section 725, the ADA funding for terminals, is that available to GA terminals as well, or is it only Part 139?
If you give me 1 second, if somebody else can come up with another question, I will pull it up and verify for you. I'm pulling it up on my screen if there's another question by chance.
While he's looking that up, and while we wait for questions, I'll remind our attendees of our upcoming fall conference in Saratoga. We really want to invite you to participate in that. That will be September 18th through the 20th. The theme is fundamentals, and we really want to focus on providing information to our members that will help them be successful moving forward by addressing the core fundamentals of managing an airport, supporting an airport, consulting to an airport, et cetera, et cetera.
And I'm working on getting that answer. I apologize, Riley. My computer's being very, very slow.
The other thing that I'd bring up to those that are on the call is our intention is to hold these virtual lunch and learn sessions monthly. And we're very excited. We've already laid out the next few months of topics. So for the month of June, we will focus on increasing usage at your airfield. And board member Wes Werbelow is taking the lead on that and has already sent communication about his efforts to gain information and also make sure that when we hold this next month's session that it's valuable to you as members. July's topic will center on some of the changes when it comes to PFAS and AFFF. And Jordan McDougall and the team in Jackson will take the lead on that and provide very helpful information to our team. When we look at August, we wanted to talk about the opportunity to build strong relationships as you work with your respective boards and also with community members. And so board member Aaron Buck will coordinate that effort, and that will be the topic for August. And then September will be, again, our opportunity to gather as a coalition for our fall conference.
While I'm still trying to pull this up, my screen keeps crashing on that specific item. I just want to remind folks, I know we've lost a couple, but each of our communities has an opportunity when you have a member of the staff from our congressional delegation, when they visit your community, whether it be visiting your airport or going to a community event, if you have the opportunity to meet with our congressional delegation or with any of their staffers, what can you do to help? The biggest thing at this point with reauthorization is say thank you. And then the second one is now we need the appropriation. We appreciate the authorization. We appreciate all that hard work, but now we need your help to get us across the finish line. And that's by getting us the full appropriation. Get us the full amount that you authorized so we can do these important projects. And it's important that if you're at an airport and you have a project in mind that could be funded with that appropriation, that you bring that up and have them feel like it's their project and talk about that. And if you ever have a question, if you know you're about to meet with somebody, it's on your calendar and you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or any of the other members of the team. We want to help you. We can help prepare you. We can give you talking points. We could do a lot of different things to make it easier on you. And go figure now, what I wanted is opening up about 30 flipping windows on my screen right now. But we can help you get to where you need to be to make sure that you get all the information necessary. So I am finally getting the document pulled up here. I apologize, everybody. Is there any other questions, Kyle, while we keep going here?
No, Devin, looks like that's the one that's come in. Outside of Lisa Stott saying thank you, and she expressed her gratitude for what you're doing.
Awesome. I am almost there. Apologize, I don't have that one off the top of my head. Ooh, 5 sections away. All right, so for section 725, the eligibility does not appear to differentiate between the type of airport. So looking at this, it does not discriminate between airport sizes from what I read here very quickly. So hopefully that helps answer your question, Riley. Yeah, I don't see anything here, and it's capped at $20 million as a set aside. So $20 million a year from fiscal year 25 through 28, but no discrimination against airport size. So.
Great. Thank you for the questions, and there's nothing else in the queue, so I think we're at time. I do want to thank Mr. Brubaker again for his expertise, for being willing to do our first virtual lunch and learn series. Those that are on the call, please invite your other members of your airport or friends, because we want this to be topical. We want it to be valuable to you. And if you have topics that you'd like us to address as a board, please reach out to one of us and we'll get it scheduled. So with that, thank you, Mr. Brubaker, and thank you for those that attended, and we'll see you next month.
Awesome. Thanks.